Hello, everybody. I'm here today with Phil Klever. Hello, Phil.
Hi, Guillermo.
Uh, Phil is a licensed marriage and family therapist and social worker. He's been applying Bowen Theory in his clinical practice and personal life since 1974. He's tested hypotheses in Bowen Theory by conducting longitudinal studies with 51 multi-generational families from 1995 to 2018, which is pretty amazing because longitudinal studies, I think, are particularly difficult. He's written numerous chapters and research articles on topics related to Bowen Theory, including marriage, application of differentiation of self, triangles, emotional contact versus cutoff, family projection, multi-generational transmission, and more. He's a rounded psychotherapist. So thanks for being here, Phil. I really appreciate it.
I guess it's better to be rounded than square.
Yeah, nobody wants to be a square psychotherapist.
I guess not.
Um, so I guess, well, first of all, is there anything you wanted to say about your work or just in introducing yourself that I missed or anything?
No, I think you said it well. It describes, Bowen theory and looking at the role of relationships in people's lives is it's such a core concept and such a core part of my thinking and actually my being. So
Mm.
it's just, and actually, I think relationships are pretty central to everyone and who they are.
Yeah. I was just thinking this morning, I think everything when it comes down to it is embedded in a relationship system. Uh, our physiology, our psychology, it's all embedded in relationships.
Yeah, I would agree. So your
Yeah.
podcast it has a good focus, I think. It's hitting at an important point.
Huh. That's the idea. I'm trying.
Yeah.
Um, so Phil, why don't you? I'd like to know a little bit about how you got into psychotherapy in the first place. It's an odd thing for somebody to choose.
Uh yeah, I guess it is, unless you're me. It's not odd for me. I grew up in a family where my mother was her she was so devoted to service.
Mm,
And her mother was always helping. I never knew her. She died before I was born, but her mother was a helper in the community. She helped deliver babies. She would take food to people in need at every turn. And that's the story I have about her. And then my mother took that to a whole nother level and served, had a role of helping others in the community. She was president of the church women's group. She was chairman
mm,
of the Easter Seals in Iowa. She was a master farm homemaker. I grew up on a farm. She and was the president of that organization in the state of Iowa. So anyway, that was in my daily experience. Um,
mm,
I had a lot of respect for my mother and a lot of fusion too. So I just identified a lot with her, even though I'm obviously somewhat different from her as well. So why did I become a psychotherapist? I actually was a music major in college, and in midway through, of course, the Vietnam War was going on, and I realized I wanted to save the world. I had this value in me that was a part of me, and sitting in a practice room in a music studio didn't seem like it was saving the world, and which of course was a grandiose idea to begin with. But anyway, that's where I was at that age, and the Vietnam War really uh, was a societal thing that pushed me to get clear about what did I want to do with my life. And
mm,
so that's when I got into the idea of helping people. Of course, as I studied Bowen theory, it became less about helping people and more about being interested in human behavior and
mm.
how to manage my own human behavior and to be with others and how they live their lives. and to learn as much as I can about that, which continues to be fascinating to me.
So you pick something that you could keep doing the rest of your life, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
That's so interesting. I was thinking this morning about, I think there's periods in time history where the social tension mounts and it activates this impulse to help, to care for, and that can be done effectively or not. Uh, and it can be polarizing or not, I think. But it's just interesting that you were saying that this something about the period you were in activated something for you that was already there.
Yes,
Oh.
yes. David Brooks
So
talked about that, about how uh, a fair degree of human direction, we may think it's intrinsic, but it's in part responding to what's happening in the world. Whether it's
mm,
Dwight Eisenhower responding to the war, and then his response helped elevate him further as a leader. I, on and on. Anyway, go back to your comments.
we could follow wherever you go. Um, I was just interested in this idea of relationships that you found your way into Bowen theory, like you were talking about, which is, I guess, a relational way of thinking about individuals and challenges that individuals face. Um, maybe tell me some of your thinking on this theory and how you got into it, how it's useful to you.
Yeah, I think part of what drew me to the theory, I had a graduate class in family systems theory, and one of the segments of the class was on Bowen theory. And what I really liked about it was a multi-generational component. And I think I liked that because, again, my mother was very involved
Mhm.
with her multi-generational family, keeping a lot of contact with her siblings, her aunts and uncles, just people in the family, cousins. And so, again, that seemed like it just made sense. That's what I knew and grew up with. She was more outgoing. I had more anxiety. I think I had more anxiety about moving toward people than she did, but
Mhm.
nevertheless, it was again in my life, in my thinking. So that's what
Mm.
took me to Bowen theory.
So what tell me a little bit about your how you think about Bowen theory, family systems theory.
Yeah, um, I think it's kind of similar to what you were saying, that Bowen theory really acknowledges the importance of relationships. It's like breathing uh, in terms of life, and
Yeah.
the quality of our relationships makes a big difference. And um, there's so many examples. We could spend months on talking about all the different ways relationships influence it. One pathway into looking at it might be just to zero in on, for instance, marriage or a couple
Mhm.
relationship. Bowen said that we show our greatest immaturity, emotional immaturity, in a couple relationship.
Now, what is that? What draws it out? What draws out our immaturity about more intimate relationships?
I've thought about that and I've lived it, so I kind of have both. I've observed it in others and myself. I just think it's the interdependence that recreates the original dependency and fusion with the mother and father in that triangle and the family. That you know, you'll hear this from parents, that their kid, they'll go to the school and expect to hear a bad report, and the parent finds out the kid's doing great, and then they come home and they're angry or a mess or acting childlike, more immature than what they really do in the world. And so to me, that's one example. Or it's the husband or wife who out in the world is quite competent and successful. They come home and they act more like a baby. And
Mm.
so there's something about the attachment, the intensity of the attachment to the other, and how much, and this would relate to what Bowen talks about as unresolved emotional attachment. It's basically talking about how much our sense of self, psychologically, but even physiologically, that's out of our awareness, is dependent upon what's going on in our relationships. And
Mm.
uh, the need for approval. I was thinking of a man yesterday that I talked with who's a coach of his son's baseball team. And he was doing fine until a mother came up to him and said, "Why aren't you playing my son?"
Ooh.
And so his sensitivity to this criticism, of course, he was talking about it in therapy, in the consultation, because it was upsetting him, his need for
Mm.
approval. And we all have this. What can get going when we get a dirty look from our partner, or they're just not as responsive, or they don't want to have sex, or maybe they want too much sex, or maybe it's this kind of interplay between togetherness and separateness, and then the threats that are in each one. You're too much for me. Why do you have to talk all the time? Or why do you want to go on a
Mm.
trip by yourself for the weekend? Why can't I go? Um,
Mm.
these sensitivities uh, to our sense of security and the attachment.
Mm.
And
Would it be that we all have these sensitivities, but what we're sensitive to differs based on our experience in some way?
yeah, we all have the sensitivity. It's a matter of degree. And then how it plays out varies. Some people
Mm.
manage their sensitivity to the other by controlling or managing or being dominant with the other. That's a way to, that's the relationship orientation. Um,
Uh,
Others are the opposite. They're more, whatever you want to do is fine with me. It's no big deal. Uh, and, I'm easy to get along with, kind of,
Uh-huh.
which of course isn't so easy to get along with in the long run. But, but yeah, and these things really make a difference. The research on health is fascinating, related to like marriage, just on marriage.
Mhm.
One, people who have a partner are healthier generally. They tend to live longer. They tend to have better health outcomes. Uh, but there's always the caveat: if you're in a marriage that is stressed, or that has problems, you're actually going to have worse outcomes than if you're single. Uh,
Yeah. Interesting. So if you're married and it's relatively stable, the outcomes are better. But if the intensities and the conflict and the tension is high, it can be worse outcomes.
yeah, you can be. That's people are often right in that situation. They think I'd be better off by myself. That's a common flight response in that intensity. I want to
Mhm.
I want to cut off from this person, get away, and they might be right in the short run, although that has a whole set of problems of its own, being kind of living your life more solitary. And that's a way to manage all that sensitivity, is just to get away from it. Uh,
Mm.
but yeah, in terms of the effect of the relationship, it has profound effects. Of course, that what Bowen adds to this that isn't in the research of the marriage research related to health and outcomes. Sometimes you can have a good marriage because you're uh, targeting your child and showing all this worry, or have these high expectations, or think your child is perfect and they're the model child, and all the attention, instead of going to the couple, goes to the child.
Mm.
So that's one of the ways it can go. It can go other ways too, but um, that's kind of the fun thing about Bowen theory, is
Oops.
it it's complicated, and it actually provides a map to make sense of the complications and the exceptions of how relationships influence us and how we influence our relationships.
Mm. It gives is the map like patterns? It gives you things to see, to look for, interpret.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Mm.
I see
So
this.
yeah. No, 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 please go. Keep going.
I'm just going to say, I see this in my research, the variation. You have really low tension families that appear to be more emotionally mature, and they tend to have pretty low conflict, open marriages, and they tend to both be pretty healthy. One isn't functioning at the expense of the other, and their kids tend to be doing pretty well. Now, that doesn't mean there's none of that going on. They might have a wife who occasionally has gets kind of down for a couple weeks or a month, but rebounds, or they may have a kid who is a little bit more focused on than the others, but actually functions almost as good or better than the other siblings. And that compares. Then the other extreme is high tension families where the marriage has all kinds of problems. The spouses are depressed or have health issues or have a hard time coping. And then their kids also have difficulty. And then in between, what I see is what we're talking about, the variation, the marriage that does well and the
Mm,
kids that do bad, or the kids that do well and the marriage is not doing so well, or a depressed wife who's
huh,
chronically depressed. Um, so it's just fascinating to see how these patterns play out.
mm. And so many variables impacted.
Yes.
Uh, uh. Um, oh, just one thing real quick. When you say open relationships, um, what do you mean? I don't want people to think you're talking about polygamy or something here.
Yeah. No, I'm not talking. I'm talking about the ability to talk about self openly with a partner and the ability to listen to the partner. Um,
Beautiful.
yeah, there are polygamous societies, but even those societies, uh, it's the top 10% that tend to be polygamous, and the
Mm,
rest of the group tend to form pair bonds. So there is a natural tendency in humans to find a partner, to be there's something about the partner relationship that's a natural, and it's found throughout life, uh,
mm,
even beyond mammals that are pair bonded. You'll find even crustaceans uh, they're that will tend to hang out, a pair that will hang out with each other, and they have better
mm.
reproductive rates. They may reproduce with others some too, but their preference is with this other organism.
There's something about bonding as a pair that's useful for adapting, evolving, facing challenges.
Yeah.
Huh.
It's not the majority of species. The majority of species are, as you're saying, are polygamous and maybe don't show a lot of partner preference. But
Yeah. But they didn't build cities, you know.
yeah, well, yeah. Well, ants build colonies.
Wow, that's true. So, Phil, let's say a couple comes into your office. How do you start thinking about them?
Well, uh, I just want to get to
What?
know. Go ahead.
Yeah, what do they? What would they tend to come in with? What's been your experience with what? Yeah, what brings people in? Couples.
Yeah. Well, they're in pain. They're distressed, and our relationships are our biggest stressor. Even if we're not paired up with somebody, we're usually stressed about something, about not having a partner or about not having enough friends, or our mother is driving me crazy, or it's always about something related to a relationship. So what do they bring in? A pretty universal, there's some degree of distance that
Mm,
contributes to pain. And what that looks like, it may be a fluctuation between intense conflict followed by withdrawal, or it may be just distance. It may just not talking much. I can think of a couple I worked with years ago. Came into my office to talk about uh, the problems in their marriage, and uh, I was asking questions like, "Well, tell me, um, how often do you talk with each other? When you talk, what's it like? Um, and what do you tend to have tension about with each other?" just basic questions to understand how does this relationship work. I get a call then about 3 days, 4 days later from the wife. She says, I'm canceling. I'm never coming back. I've had a migraine for 4 days after our session. And how I made sense of that is just sitting there talking and listening triggered so much emotional reactivity, such a strong physiological response that it again created a migraine and something so painful.
Mm.
And they were a couple that actually had a hard time living with each other, but couldn't live without it. Like when he was away traveling, she couldn't stop thinking about him. But when
Mm.
they're together, they couldn't stand each other. That's an extreme. But so, how does a couple? Your question is, how does a couple present? There are various ways that the distance will show, and what they're trying to figure out is the basics of it, as I see, is how do I be a self and be responsible and connected to you? And where the rub is in that often is dealing with the difference that I have an emotional reaction to. You want to live life and enjoy our money. I want to save money. And she thinks saving money is being not having any fun. And, and then it becomes not just we have a difference, but you won't listen to me. You don't respect me.
Mm.
I need you to agree with me to feel secure with you.
Mm. Now, so many people would say that's a communication issue,
Uh huh.
you know? Uh, and I guess my experience and my understanding, my sense of it is that there's something underneath communication that's getting in the way for people. What, how do you think about that? Is it a communication issue? Is it something else? Is it,
Well, it's in part a communication issue. It's the emotional reactivity that's in the communication and the
Mm.
inability of the couple to manage the emotional reactivity in the relationship when they're talking. It's a look, it's a topic, it's a tone, and then couples practice this over and over, so it becomes so routinized. You don't even have to say anything. Just the even the thought of whatever the issue is, parenting, money, sex, triggers this. And with more tension, there's uh, the automatic responses take over. So, to your point about is it communication? It's about one's ability to self regulate, which involves also having a way to think about what's going on here.
mm,
That uh, what's my part? And that I would say 90% of people I see that come in as couples, the problem is in their partner. And they either say it outright or they say it in a really indirect, nice way, but
mhm,
that we're here to work on her problem or his problem. Um, and so, yeah, that's often another part of this. The
mm.
relationship dilemma is,
Would that,
go
no, no,
ahead.
no, keep going, keep going, keep going.
Go ahead.
Well, it was just, you said there's people come in with pain, which I thought was a beautiful way to simplify it. I think people are looking for relief from pain
Yep.
when they come in, and yet uh, what's causing me pain is the threat, and so my focus is on that, on changing that. Is that how our focus gets? Is that how we start to view the other as the problem, or what? Is there something else that goes into it?
I think that's a good analysis. What you said is really useful. I think the other part of it is I think that's it is automatic that under stress, there's a focus on the other. It's adaptive to a degree that if there's threat, I need to take care of the environment. I need to respond to the tiger that's going to attack me or the people that are against me. I need to be able to muster a response or flee or get together with my group to defend ourselves.
Mm.
I think the other part, though, is learning. I think that a person's ability to be more thoughtful, objective, uh, more understanding of the other, to do more what I call systems thinking, is in part learned. That it's what is the nature of being able to be thoughtful in the family? What's the ability to, what's the practice in tolerating differences? Does a family put down others frequently? Is there a lot of gossip against others? Do they experience that? Is that how tensions within the family are handled? There's more blaming. So I think there is that as well, but it's more than learned, but learning of influences it too.
Mm. Learning the patterns from our family helps us manage ourselves in some way.
Yes. Yeah.
Huh. What well, how do people start to see what they don't see?
Yeah.
Like,
Some,
my because what you're saying is these patterns that are part of our life, we've been swimming in them since we were born. Um, how do we start to see them? And they're impacting our relationships. They're causing pain to our partner, to ourselves. How do we start to see it?
it's a great question. Some people don't. I
Mm,
think the emotion, the intensity of the emotion keeps the cognitive focus on the other. Uh, and that's a good predictor of, in consultation, a person's ability to make much movement. Um, but so, how do you see? Um, One is there's an ability to reduce the tension enough to activate cognitive ability. Now, I think
mm,
people can think in the midst of tension. Victoria Harrison talks about this, that people are able to make steps toward better emotional maturity, to better differentiation, to define a self. They're not doing it always when they're real calm. They may have more heightened anxiety, but they've learned how to think more, how to use their intellectual system more while they're having emotional reactivity. And so while managing tension helps, another component is just developing a new way to think.
mm,
And that's where maybe the clinical session can be of help, is it provides a new way to think if a person can hear it, if it makes sense to them. A new way to think that looks at, well, as she does A, you do B, and as you do B, she does A. It kind of happens at the same time, and then your child does C, and your mother is over here, and it seems like when you're interacting with her, your wife gets more twitchy with your son, and uh, one is able to begin to see how the system works. And one's part, that's a key part, is working on your own part of it. And some
mm,
people are more adept at seeing that. Maybe another component is my ability to communicate or to engage with the person in a thoughtful way. So sometimes I may be a part of the person not being able to see it. Uh,
mm. That the therapist, as the therapist.
yeah, yeah, that I don't want to. I mean, a systems way to think about it is, it isn't just the the client, that I have an important part or a part in the person's ability to think differently. And some
Mm,
don't want to think differently, and that's fine too.
absolutely. Mm. What how do people, if these patterns come from our family or develop early in our life, and they're playing out, they're having effects in our current relationships. Um, was I hearing you right that you can work on them? Working on them outside of the relationship is one way to work at it too, outside of the spousal partnership or intimate partnership.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's right. if I'm understanding your question, you're wondering how does a person work on this if they're having problems with their spouse or partner? Uh, is that the only place they can work on it? Is that your question?
Hmm.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. And I think that, Bowen, of course, found this uh, an interesting thing when he was training residents um, on how to use this theory. He found that the residents made more progress when they focused more on their family of origin and less on their nuclear family relationships. So there was something he began to see that happens when a person expands the lens and maybe gets to the origin or the history of one's own immaturity or emotional reactivity with the spouse or partner.
Mm.
There are roots of this with the mother, father, those triangles, extended family, and that is useful in reducing tension, getting a broader lens, and it's a part of the new way of thinking.
Mm. Mm. It's finding out, exploring where the emotional reactivity comes from.
Yeah,
Uh, I I loved what you said earlier when we were talking about communication. You said it's the emotional reactivity in the communication. Yeah.
yeah,
What just for everybody listen, how do you think about emotional reactivity? What is that?
yeah. I think um, it's the emotional valence. Valence is another word of that's activated. Uh, so what the emotion is can vary. Uh, it can be uh,
Like sad, angry.
right, love,
Okay.
whatever that is, can be anger, hurt. So yeah, emotional reactivity is it's sort of the automatic response that's first in one's body. Yeah, that's the quickest. The quickest in the neurotransmitters is this perceiving what's going on, and then the automatic thing that is happening in your nervous system and your endocrine system, your in your so forth, and then you start to think about it. Maybe a half second later, have a reflection, and often that thinking about it is governed by your previous experience with that trigger, the spouse's look or that tone of voice. It's automatic, and you fill in with your usual way. There she goes again, being
Mm.
critical of me or bailing out or whatever it is that one uh, maps onto that what's one thinks one's seeing in the environment. So it's a
Mm.
question: what is emotional reactivity? It's not being thoughtful. That's what it isn't. Of course,
It's that automatic response that you're talking about.
yeah. Now it can. What's confusing about this? Someone who's overly how do I say this? Emotional activity can express itself in being kind of controlled or distant. It can be, it can seem
Mm.
really calm or relaxed, but it's not really being, it's a distance response, being engaged, but really not saying much about yourself, really not making emotional contact with the partner. It,
Mm.
it's being maybe friendly or just kind of superficial. I think of that as that doesn't look like an emotional response, but it's another variation of emotional response. To be protective, to be careful,
Mm. And that would incite something in the other.
maybe. Yeah,
It could potentially.
yeah.
I hear you. It's so interesting that being appearing non-reactive is emotional reactivity, but more of a distance position.
It's kind of the one of, oh, I don't care. Whatever you want to do is fine with me.
Absolutely. Wherever you want to go.
Yeah, avoiding being a self.
Do you find that that's a position of one of the partners when you've seen a couple?
Oh, yeah, that happens. Sure.
Yeah, I,
And
I hear you.
they're very good at pointing the finger at, often at their more emotionally intense, of overtly intense partner.
Mm.
I'm a thinker, she's a feeler. That's what they'll say. That's always a tip off to me.
Um, but yet, what you're talking about is not one person isn't causing something in the other, but they're contributing to it in some way. Is what I'm hearing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to move from cause effect thinking to systems thinking that these patterns emerge almost simultaneously.
Mm. In other words, as I respond to you, you were reacting to me, and we're getting caught up in like a little dance.
Yeah. I'll often say to couples, because I hear it over and over, I said, you could write the script for your next fight. You might think about that because they already know what each other's going to say.
That's so true. I was just with somebody the other day, and they made a prediction, and sure enough, that's exactly what played out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so predictable, especially the more these the more emotionally immature the patterns are, the more tension there is. With less tension, there can be a bit more flexibility, or if a person has a fairly high degree of emotional maturity, they're going to be able to manage and have options and not just be defensive or not just pull away, but find a way
Yeah.
to deal with what's going on.
Yeah. Somebody told me a little mantra: don't attack, don't defend, don't placate, and don't run away. You know, what's left? I don't know. It's to figure it out.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, those are
uh,
good.
yeah, I thought it was useful. You know,
Yeah.
when you have this couple in front of you, um, do both of them need to buy in, or is it possible? Does one tend to buy in more than the other in working on kind of their part in it?
That's a really good question because I think there's a common notion that marital therapy is both parties being in the office. And if they're not both working on it, then, excuse me, then you're not going to get anywhere with the marriage. And uh, I've done work with individuals who have couple issues and work on it on their own. And they get somewhere, especially if they can identify their own part and see how the system works, which isn't to say it's all their fault. That's not helpful either. But to be able to just, like you were describing, being able to predict the patterns, to know them, to have more intellectual understanding and not just be guided by automatic reactions. So, yeah, um, and so I think that that can work. And it's actually for couples that have a lot of overt intensity with each other and highly reactive in a session. I mean, I try to monitor that by having them talk to me and not respond to each other. But sometimes there's so much sensitivity, they're sitting there just stirred up, and they can't really think very clearly. I will almost always work with that couple separately.
Mm. You work with each one individually.
Yeah, each one individually, it enables a bit more, sometimes anyway, for them to not be reacting to the other in the session at least and try to focus on their own part.
Mm. Is that what you're talking about? You have to bring the anxiety. If you bring the anxiety down, somebody can try start to think and work on the learning part of it.
It helps to do that, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Hmm. You said you were saying something else a minute ago. Uh, and I'm trying to remember. It stuck out to me, and then it flew away, Phil.
Yeah.
Um, hmm,
One of the things I'm thinking about as we're talking is as you broaden the lens, the degree of marital tension is related a fair degree to the nature of their relationships with their families of origin in the extended family. And so you talk about, I'm talking about tension in the couple, but that tension is uh, related to the amount of emotional maturity and connection with the larger family.
Mm,
Is the couple a cocoon kind of cut off from their own families and manage life's challenges primarily between them versus having a network of relationships that they're a part of that help them with a move or childcare or uh, getting a new job or just someone to talk to who helps to reduce the anxiety that then it would be in the marriage. And it can go the opposite way too, where you have uh, heavy involvement with the extended family
mm,
that without much individuality or a sense of self, that it's part of the one big glob. And so when the extended family is more tense or anxious, the couple's going to be more stirred up too. So, um, but that's one important variable in the amount of tension the couple has. That they
mm,
use a phrase I like, that of what you swim in or what you live with. A person who's more cut off or unresolved with their extended family lives in more tension.
mm, mm. It's like there's less places for the energy to go, so to speak.
Yeah,
I forget it. I think it was Deborah Gordon. I hope I don't butcher her research on ants. Uh, she was studying why some colonies lived longer than the others. And one of the things she found was that the older, more established colonies that were more adaptive had more points of contact where information could pass.
yeah,
Uh, that always stuck with me as a useful analogy for families. You know?
yeah. I think it's probably a property of life.
Hmm,
How it actually works in ants versus humans or mammals or fish. There may be some variation, but the role of the relationship in influencing functioning. And you mentioned one is the transfer of information, uh, which would be one important thing.
hmm. Which would be speak to the quality of openness in a family, how information uh, gets passed down, flows, the stories people tell,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, that's one of the findings in my study is when the participants knew more of the facts of their extended family, they tended to have less symptoms in their uh, family of procreation, the couple, the kids, that group tended to do a little bit better. And it
Mm,
would be related to the level of openness, as you're saying, in the relationship with mother, father, aunts, and uncles. You can hear the stories. I remember when I was working on this years ago, I went to see a cousin, one of my mother's cousins, as I was trying to work on bridging cutoff. I kept a distance with my family that I was trying to move past, break break free or change that. And my cousin, when I asked her about my grandfather, who I never knew, my mother's father, he also died before I was born. I had the story of my mother's story of her father, but when I asked my cousin, she presented a whole different picture of my grandfather uh, that I hadn't heard, and was just another piece of information that I thought was useful. Some of what she said made some sense to me, and it also let me think more about my mother's story. Where did her story about her father come from in her
mm,
experience? So anyway, those relationships uh, give more perspective.
mm. Yeah, because we really shape our behavior off of our interpretation of or our story of somebody else so often, you know. My dad was XYZ,
Right.
and then we learn all this other stuff, you know. S- you know, or my mom was X, but then you learn. you know?
Huh.
Uh, I remember my grandfather went to, I think it was the Korean War. He had his mom sign him up at 16 because he was getting in trouble, you know? Uh, there's I love those little stories that you learn as you talk.
Yeah.
Um, so I remembered what I was going to ask you. It
Okay.
was this idea that in therapy you have couples talk to you. Does that mean they're not talking to each other? Some therapists say look at each other, talk.
Yeah, I that's correct. That how I do work with couples when there are two people in my office, I have them talk to me and not to each other. And
Mm,
with some frequency, couples are a little bit bothered by that because they want to talk to each other, partly because they're not talking at home, or they want to react and tell the person how they're wrong. That's not how it happened. And so what that does, me talking with each person, is it helps them to give a less, hopefully, a less reactive perspective of what's going on. That it
mm,
helps them to be more grounded in their own perspective, their own thinking, and less reacting to what the partner is saying or want them to say. Um, and it reduces the emotion, maybe it can help to reduce the emotional intensity in the session, which I think is helpful in looking at a person's thinking.
mm.
Um,
Yeah. So it's really trying to limit that as you're talking, looking over at the other person to see how they're responding to what you're saying.
yeah,
Uh,
which they do anyway, but it slows it down a little bit.
I hear you. It's like helping people think about their own thinking rather than that emotional reaction to the other.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Often people say, "Well, I'd like to know what he thinks about this," because they're hesitant to say what they think, what they observe. And
mm,
I say, "No, I want to know your observation, what you see, what your perception is, what your experience is, and how you think about this."
mm,
And for some people, that's new, especially the person who says, "I don't care, whatever you want is fine with me." To have to start to define their way of thinking, their feelings, their perspective, that can be uncomfortable.
I find it. I'm so amazed by my own immaturity all the time. You know, but also just at how sensitive we are to each other, how much we adjust, pre-adjust,
Yeah,
before we even know what's going on, or how much I pre-adjust. Uh, it's something I've been working on, Phil, is really sticking to what I think and bringing that to my wife, um, and it's made a world of difference. I'll tell you that. You know,
yeah,
uh,
yeah, yeah. If you're,
but I think it's so hard for humans. I think to be a self with somebody they care about.
yeah,
Mm,
yeah, it is. It can be especially. It's hard in different ways for different people, but people who are pleasers, who want to go along, they manage the relationship with mother by accommodating her. That's a lot of what I did. And so that's part of uh, the ongoing trajectory for my adult life and emotional maturity is what you're just describing, is
mm,
managing the anxiety uh, in being more of a self and saying what I think and dealing with the other not agreeing or not liking what I'm saying, which of course most of the time it's nothing to be afraid of. It's welcomed for it enhances interaction for me to be clear about myself. So
You know what I always find fascinating is sometimes conflict directed towards the one that's avoidant is saying, "Hey, I want you to take a position for self. Say something."
yeah, yeah,
You know, it's a reaction to the distance in the other saying, "Show up."
yeah. It's an interesting thing about human behavior. There are so many variations in how people handle their relationship sensitivity. I already talked about the person who's the opposite, that they
Hmm.
fill the space with their thoughts and feelings and don't aren't really that interested in what other people think and feel, and prefer to be the center stage, and that the relationships center around them, or to direct the other, to they know what's best for the other, and
Mm.
it's clear. And um, so firstborns tend to have some of that.
Some of that filling the space, knowing what's best, telling
Yeah.
the other.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and often they're pretty good at it, at coming up with an opinion. This is what needs to be done. This is where you need to go, and um,
Mhm.
so it works until it doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you keep the good part and do less of the less useful part?
Yeah, moving
I was
from
talking to I was talking to a firstborn the other day. I said, "You've been doing this your whole life." He said, "Oh my God."
yeah, it's moving from the less healthy part of that, less mature part of that is knowing what's best for the other, to have the hubris to think that versus this is what's best for me. And then the other is being as interested, because in that style of being in the world, the belief is I really do have the right way and you don't.
Mm,
And so it's changing that thinking for that person, that, well, it seems right for me, but I realize it may not be right for you. Um, that's a new way to think.
mm. I'm not going to put my opinion about what you should do onto you.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. That provides some relief.
Yeah.
Does it gives the other person a chance to step up to make
Yeah.
a decision.
Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah, you should go to the gym and you should start doing resistance training. And these are the things that would help you. Um, and of course, those aren't bad ideas necessarily, but when it's that process, and instead of being interested, well, what are you thinking about your fitness? What's important to you about it or not?
mm,
I think of that with goals. I've done some writing, some research on goals, and it's interesting for me to think about how many of our goals that we think are intrinsic, that we think are we're pursuing something because it's important to us, because it's a part of our natural curiosity. How much of that is influenced by, on some level, we know it pleases our mother, or a coach had a big influence on us, and so it's involved in the relationships to some degree, even the development of that, or um, maybe as a child, someone liked to take toys apart and figure out how they fit together. And the comments from the parents that, oh, you're so, you have such a good analytical mind, uh, how that, so you think, and maybe it is a partly an intrinsic from within, but inevitably relationships are involved in the development even of the self, of
mm.
what seems like this is from within me.
Do you think there's a process people or individuals go through of kind of sorting that out? Like this goal's not working out. Maybe it wasn't my goal in the first place.
Yeah, I think that's part of the trial and error in life sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
person who became a doctor and then realized at 35 that they don't really like being a doctor, that they did this, that an awareness emerges that I did this to please my parents,
Hmm.
or because
It's
I thought it'd give me status, and I realized status isn't all that important to me.
mm, kind of the not looking at how would you say that? Not maybe understanding ourselves is one way to think about it. Not understanding the degree to which we're influenced by the pressures around us, other
Yeah,
people's expectations.
yeah.
Mm.
I don't think,
It's hard to shake that off.
yeah, I don't think one can escape it. It's maybe just more consciously owning it for self.
Mm.
Uh,
I think you're right about that. It's inescapable.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Phil, tell me a little bit. I'm curious about your research. Who, how did, first of all, what is it, and how did you decide to take on a longitudinal study?
Yeah, I was at a point in my life, I was in my 40s, and was at a point that I knew I had energy to take on a new thing. And I thought of studying songwriting and go that direction. And then I thought of also doing research, really learning more about Bowen theory by expanding beyond the clinical setting and my personal application to doing it in research, maybe adding a little bit to the development of Bowen theory in the world, maybe a grain of sand on the beach. And so I chose that path. That was a goal that I decided to pursue and thought that would be something that then I'd have a body of data that I could even work with in my retirement if I wanted to. Um, and so I chose it because I had a lot of commitment to Bowen theory and really thought the ideas were important. And like I said, I wanted to expand and grow them and give
Mm.
my and also just I thought it helped me to learn more. And it would be a challenge to me, which I was looking for, something to challenge myself further. So there was more to your question. I forget what else you asked.
Yeah. Well, so you chose to, you were studying families, not individuals.
Yeah, well, I actually I first thought my first beginning thought was, well, I want to study marriages, and then I thought, how do you study marriages without looking at the context of the marriage? I mean, that's Bowen theory. You don't just look at a marriage. There's so many ways that can go, um,
Mhm.
and so, and I realized the the focus needed to be the unit, the family unit, and
Mm.
and then I thought I need to look at what is the family unit interacting with. And so I, um, that was my thinking at that point, to develop a way to look at the unit to see what is variation in unit functioning and what's a, a observable or behavioral way I can look at the functioning of a unit. And so what I decided to look at was I took the three processes in Bowen theory, marital distance and conflict, the immaturity going to the physical, psychiatric, or social functioning of the one of the partners or both, and or to the kids. And with a
Mm.
couple, that would be losing self, one going doing better, worse, or focusing on the kids. So those are the three things I was looking at and thought I could look at the degree of child symptoms, the degree of adult symptoms, and how the marriage, the marital distance and conflict. Those are the three things I looked at and how those fit together. If there was a lot more of that in some families, that meant that that family was struggling more. And if there was a lot less of it, that family was struggling less. And I thought it'd be useful to look at, okay, how does this unfold over time? Because one point in time, you can have a couple that has a lot of fusion. They kind of are one with each other. And during a good period, they're on cloud nine and doing great. So it doesn't look distant. It doesn't look conflictual at all. So anyway, I thought that time would tell me more. And then
Mm.
I was thinking, okay, what influences these things? And one thing I looked at, thought I wanted to look at was the degree, the nature of the relationships with the extended family. Were they open? What was the frequency of contact versus how much cutoff was there? I don't talk, or I'm superficial, or so that's one. Another was, did they come from families that were pretty highly symptomatic or less so? So I looked at the level of of stir and in turmoil in the family of origin in the extended family. That was a second variable I looked at. A third variable was the level of stress that was in the nuclear family, the participants' lives, but also in the multi generational family. Assuming that the more stress there is, the research is pretty clear on that. If you have a lot of stress, you're going to have
Yeah.
probably more difficulty, more likely to have some degree of symptomology. And then the fourth was I was trying to find a way to look at something about individuality, how
Mm.
much a person knew themselves, were able to take action for self. And so I picked goal direction and effectiveness. And so that was the fourth thing I looked at was if you have more effectiveness in going toward things you want to do, and but not just you, but you and your partner, if you both are moving in that direction more and doing it pretty well, the hypothesis was that that'd be a moderator would help to not it would reduce the amount of symptomology in your family unit. And all of those
Mm.
things have been supported by those hypotheses have been supported by the research. The research has shown that those actually, at least there are associations between that support the hypotheses.
Okay. What, first of all, 23 years, I think it was about 23 years that you checked in with the families. Did you check in with them every year, every few years?
Yeah, I checked in with the couple every year uh, through written questionnaires. I didn't have the internet. If I were doing it today, it'd be all just online. It'd be
Yeah.
much more of a piece of cake, and I could anyway. I won't go down that pathway, but yeah. So I did an annual interview as well as they did a written questionnaire, and they did it separately. The husband and the
Mm.
wife. They were all heterosexual couples. That's one of the limitations. There's a lack of diversity. There were some racial minorities, but that was about 14% of the participants, which
Mhm.
is less than the national, well, I think it's less than the national average of minorities in the population. So those are two limitations. But yeah, I checked in with them annually. At the end of 15 years, uh, I changed, I took the six most symptomatic family units and the six least symptomatic family units, and I followed them for the rest of the study. So, and by the 15th year, of the 51 families, only 40 were still in the study, which is
Mm.
predictable that in a longitudinal
Sure.
study, you're going to get some dropout. But there's still enough involvement that it was it was statistically significant, and there was enough data, qualitative data as well, to have it be worthwhile.
I hear you. What was maybe a couple of the findings that came out of this that was it useful to you or interesting?
Well, it's hard to pull out one thing. It's all interesting to me. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, yeah.
to me, it's just one of the things that's interesting is me being somewhat of a novice at research. That this act, I mean, I kind of went into it thinking this may be a lot of time put into something that's not going to yield much, but at least it'll be interesting to me. Maybe a collection of case studies. Maybe at most that's what it'll be, or
Mm.
at least that's what it would be. And I think I was kind of surprised that, and I think it's the robustness of the theory that actually some of my quantitative data supported the theory. And even the qualitative
Ah.
data was rich enough to support the theory. Not that it had to be supported. It would be interesting if there are parts that weren't. I'm often asked
Mhm.
what wasn't supported, and there isn't anything that really doesn't quite fit theory. Uh,
Mm.
I think part of that is theory explains exceptions.
Yeah. The variation.
Yeah, it explains, okay, how is it a stable couple that looks like they're getting along well have these kids that have all these problems? That'd be one thing that, for instance, um, that wasn't the majority of families. but Bowen
Mm,
theory predicts that would happen, that would be in some families.
mm. You got a question that's still uh, tugging away at your, maybe not from the research, but just in general. Is there a
Well,
question that's still kind of gnawing at you?
yeah, it's what the current paper I'm working on, or I am not even working on the paper. I'm just thinking about the paper, and that is, how do you measure marital functioning?
Mm,
You know, I think marital functioning, how I measured marital distance and conflict as one of the mechanisms, but that really is not the full picture of marital functioning. According to Bowen theory, a good measure of marital functioning, I think, would be how the unit functions.
mm,
Because, like we're saying, you can have a couple that has low marital distance and conflict, but it creates that stability through one partner functioning, giving up self to the other. And in the giving up of self, they become more symptomatic. And the family organizes around those symptoms. The depressed wife or the person with
mm,
chronic inflammation of some sort that affects their system, or maybe it's the what you'd call the overfunctioning spouse who's overloaded by all the responsibility and is has metabolic syndrome, overweight, to manage all the responsibility, while the other one is uh, kind of doing their own thing and not being that responsible. I think it can go either way. So,
mm,
so what is marital function? Marital functioning is the ability of to have good, effective, open contact to manage conflict cooperatively. I think marital functioning is a promotion of both spouses or couples' personal direction, and not projecting tension onto the kids so much that the focus on, and there's inevitably focus on kids,
mhm,
but that it's moderated. I think when you have all three of those things operating, you have a really good functioning marriage.
mm.
And
What's what? Yeah,
very few of us have that.
I hear you. What would be a sign that what might you see in the family? Maybe what might you see in the yeah? What might you see in the family that lets you know? Maybe not even you as a therapist, just if it's your family, that there's um, something going on. There's some anxiety that's not getting managed. That's getting managed maybe in a not useful way.
How would I know that?
Yeah. What might be a sign in a family?
Well, to me,
An indicator.
I think one obvious sign is usually a symptom of some sort, that
Hmm.
there's trouble either in the marriage, or one of the spouses is experiencing a problem, or the kids are having difficulty.
Mm,
Um, that would
yeah.
be a sign that there's struggle in functioning.
Yeah. That there's some anxiety going on here that we could do with addressing in a different way or a better way. Something.
Right, right.
I hear you. Speaking of that, families, when a family does have a symptom, you know, they tend to focus on it, especially when it's in one person. Uh, and I think that there's so much anxiety about it, and you could say goodwill about it. They want to help, uh, but they keep focusing on it to try to fix it. Um, what part of that might be useful, and what part isn't useful? What would be different? How do you address a symptom in a family without overly focusing on the symptom?
Well, you just said it. How do you not overly focus on it? Which, what does that look like? What does that even mean? How do you know when you're over focusing versus having a realistic response? That takes some thought.
Exactly. Mm.
The over focus is driven by anxiety or tension, worry. Um, an example that pops into my mind was in my childhood. It was a family, is during the polio epidemic, and the high point of the polio epidemic was uh, my before I was even aware of what was going on. But there was a family in my small town that their daughter got polio, and I remember my mother thinking, uh, "I just can't believe how those parents treat that polio, the child with polio." My mother really thought that they should help her more, feel sorry for her more. Uh, and they treated her as someone who, the kid is someone who could be competent, who can function, can do what she needs to do. Uh, there wasn't the feeling sorry for her. And she functioned quite well in school. Actually went on to become a Miss Handicapped of America. She had a great singing voice, but anyway, that's beside the. But it's a part of her self-direction that she was.
Hmm.
Family nurtured her individuality, and I think
Mm.
a good job of not getting in the way of it by dumping a lot of anxiety onto her. So that's an example of when parents get into feeling sorry for her, can you do that, or let me help you with that, or let me, and let me do that for you. uh, it handicaps a child more than the actual disability.
Mm. Interesting. Interesting. You still playing music, Phil?
Yeah, yeah, I am. I'm working on my repertoire. I'm a pianist. I'm a B level pianist. I can get by, but there's nothing great about my musical skill.
What's a B level? Does that mean you read music? Can you play off sheet music?
Oh yeah, I can read and play off sheet music, but I don't have the kind of ear that I hear something and just sit down and play it. I'm not one
Okay.
of those. And
You're not a savant. I got it.
no, no, I'm not. I have a son who has a better musical ear than I do. It's fun to watch him just kind of have that talent to see it and hear it.
I'm always amazed when somebody can do that. Just hear the piece of music and kind of feel their way
Yeah,
into it. It's a beautiful thing to watch.
yeah, it
I
is.
mean,
Yeah,
you know,
I enjoy music, and it serves my needs, and yeah.
yeah. What you read anything interesting right now?
Yeah, I'm actually reading it's interesting you asked that. I'm reading Burned Roslenbroek. He's a German evolutionary biologist, and he's written a book published in 23 on properties of life. And he's, I first read an article of his because I was trying to understand I knew the biology better behind togetherness. What happens in togetherness? The feel good feelings, the oxytocin, the vasopressin, just what in the reward system involved in connecting with others, touching, talking. But I didn't know,
Mm-hmm.
what is the biology in individuality? What's
Mm,
the biological underpinning to want to be a separate self? And so I found an article by him. He's written a book about this, about autonomy in nature, and sees that autonomy was an important part of species evolving to a new level. That an organism or a species of organisms were able to self regulate in relationship to the environment in a new and he didn't use the word improved, but like a new improved way. And it became a new being, a new organism. That autonomy was really important. The process of self-regulation in relationship to the environment. So
mm.
uh, I was going to read. He's written a book about it, but then I saw he has a more recent book, and so I thought I'd read it. And this is his description of what he thinks are the properties of life. And he
Interesting.
makes an argument that from actually from Greek time on, and then Galileo and Descartes and Newton were all reductionists. Looking, if we know understand the parts, the atoms, the genes, the DNA, we understand the organism. We will understand behavior if we just can boil it down. And that's been the predominant view, um, versus what he calls organismic or systems thinking, which also goes back to the Greek times. There's philosophy that talks about that. And actually, religion
Mm.
even has some looking at the bigger picture and not just looking at the parts. But anyway, he's making a case for the integration of reductionism along with systems, and that it fits with Dennis Noble's work on systems biology. He quotes him, but he quotes a lot of other people too. I find it really interesting in helping me to look at, and he talks about all systems um, have this at the same time have this. I'd call it individuality and togetherness. He would call it being closed and open, or being um, autonomous but being interconnected, and
Mm.
that they happen hand in hand. So you asked about what I'm reading. That's what I'm reading, and it's I
Uh,
most people had put him to sleep, but of course I find it just fascinating.
Oh, I'm excited about it. I wrote it down. What was his name? Burned?
Yeah, Bernd.
Yeah,
Okay, the last name I think I'll remember it. Russell,
Russell.
Rossellenbroich. That's close. If you Google it, you'll probably get something close to
Okay,
what.
it's close to that.
Yeah, he's an evolutionary biologist in Germany.
Beautiful. I'm gonna look it up.
Yeah.
I was something that goes along with autonomy. I was listening to I don't know, do you know Jonathan Haidt?
Oh,
He
yeah.
just wrote, yeah, he wrote that book, The Anxious Nation, but social media and technology and kids. But he was talking about the quick dopamine release of that goes along with social media versus the slow dopamine release of moving toward a goal. You know, I think it goes along with what you were saying about measuring goal-directed activity and individuality, autonomy.
Yeah.
Um, Something fulfilling about that's a force of life, like you're describing with Burned here.
Yeah.
It's yeah.
Yeah. Goal direction. What you said just made me think about something in my paper I wrote about that goal direction inevitably involves dealing with adversity or a roadblock or disapproval. I've met with all of that in my research, and it's been a practice in differentiation or my own emotional maturity is how, like you said, it's slow. How do you deal with that? Uh, it's hard to be a self, impossible to be a self without facing that. That's a part of being a self in life, pursuing one's own direction. And
Mm.
it's too much at times for me, I guess, and for some people they can't ever get there. But it's a challenge.
Eh, a challenge that's worth it.
Yeah, I think so. And maybe that's part of the slow progression. You don't, I mean, you get big hits when you get uh, find a new advancement in pursue. Like with my research, there were moments when it just was like, wow, this is so exciting. And then another season where, what am I doing? This is such a waste of time.
Well, and that's that thing. Goals are good, and yet focusing on outcome isn't useful. It's about the process,
Yeah.
you know. So
Well, it's about the
mm,
meaning. What's important about this to me?
mm. I like that. I like that even better. Not just process. It's about finding meaning in it for yourself.
Yeah, I think it's really hard to stay with it without that.
Uh,
Unless unless you have
Absolutely,
unless you have a really good fusion going with someone.
and that'll sustain it for a while.
Yeah, I think that'll keep it going if you've got that.
That should be your next paper. Meaning over fusion. You know,
Yeah. Actually, they maybe both get you to the same goal, but one probably more steadily than the other.
I love it. Phil, thank you so much for chatting with me today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to share some of my thoughts and listen to some of yours.
All right. Thank you.
You bet.